Stop me if you've heard this start to a story before. I grew up in a small town in the southern US. A town small enough that everyone knew your business before you did. While some loved our town and swore it was the best place on earth, I've always hated it. Not only because of the people that never seemed to mind their own business, but because of the town's history and a dark curse at birth. The founding of our little town is well known to everyone that's grown up in it. Kids go through school having to write reports on it. You'll find several statues and murals dotted throughout the area depicting the town's founding. Legend has it that a majority of the town's land used to be one massive plantation owned by a well-off man and his family. After slavery was ended, the patriarch and his family refused to allow slaves to leave. He ordered the people he employed as guards to keep the former slaves on his land by any means necessary. This only went on for a couple weeks before even the armed men the family employed began to crumble under the guilt of all the violent acts they had perpetrated for decades. So, under the cover of night, the armed men freed the slaves and supplied them with weapons. The now fully armed mob stormed into the mansion and drug the patriarch and his wife out of their bed and outside before dousing them both in oil and setting them both on fire. With the now massive amount of land no longer being controlled by the cruel family, the families of the formerly employed men and newly freed slaves transformed the area into a small settlement. That settlement grew and grew until it became what it is today. The patriarch, however, had 4 sons who traveled the country as a well-known music group. Missing home, they returned only to find their parents killed and their birthright stripped. Knowing they couldn't take their family's land back by force, they instead came up with a plan to torment those that now inhabited it. It said that the sons of the patriarch had unprecedented musical talent, with voices and skills and instruments that could lure a man to his own death. And that's just what they did. Under a cover of night, they'd entice curious individuals to wander into the woods where they'd never be heard from again. After a month of mysterious disappearances, the townfolk ventured into the very woods the band had used as killing grounds, and dealt with them the same fate their parents received. However, the mysterious disappearances never stopped. Neither did the reports of alluring music drifting from the dark of the woods. Generation after generation, the reports of music went on. During my grandpa's generation, the phantoms that lured the unsuspecting to their deaths were finally given the name of the Bluegrass Sirens. Apparently, the melodies that cursed the night sounded similar to ethereal bluegrass country music. I can confirm that's true. It's all too true. Remember that part I told you about our town being so small that people know your business before you do? Well, after being caught kissing our high school quarterback while we were both freshmen, I got the label of the town gay kid. I have to admit, I always found this unfair considering the guy I had gotten caught kissing just went on, unjudged, as people made it seem like I tricked him into it. For the next couple years of high school, I was pretty much an outcast. If I wanted to walk down the halls with someone, I pretty much would have had to pay them to do so. That was until Thomas transferred to town. He transferred to our town during the beginning of my senior year. Immediately, using the excess of rainbow pins on his jean jacket to make it clear to everyone that he was gay and didn't give a shit who cared. Considering he was 6'2" and built like a brick, there wasn't anyone in our school that dared to say anything to him about it. Honestly, when I first laid my eyes on him, I thought he was the most badass thing I'd ever seen. I also thought he was the most gorgeous thing I'd ever seen. I have to admit, I began crushing on him immediately and outright fell in love after he walked right over to my lone lunch table in the corner of the cafeteria and asked if there was room at the gay kid table for one more. After that, we became quick friends, and even quicker, we discovered we had feelings for each other. We'd hang out before school until the bell rang, and would sit and talk after school until our parents came to pick us up. We may have been 2 outcasts, but we didn't care. Finally, I built up enough courage to ask him out on an actual date, to which he said yes. We met at a diner in the middle of town and sat eating fries, drinking milkshakes, and laughing for hours. Walking out of the diner, Thomas asked if I knew good spots to look at the moon for a bit before we headed home. I did, of course, but by then it was almost 9 o'clock at night. I knew the dangers of the night, but I let my feelings cloud my judgment. Thomas was new to town and hadn't yet learned of our curse, but I knew it well. I was young and dumb and in love. I didn't want the night to end, and this stupidity on my end is what got Thomas killed. He drove us to the parking lot that sat next to our school's football field, and we walked down the field until we got to a spot of grass that ended right in front of the woods. The trees in front of us were low enough that the moon shone over us like God's eye. We lay on our backs in the grass, watching the stars as they watched us back. We talked, laughed, and after one of us finally built up enough courage, we kissed. It was my first kiss, but under the night sky, it felt like you couldn't ask for better. We sat there for a while afterwards. Every cell in my body felt as if it were smiling. A faint nighttime breeze gliding across us both. It was that same breeze that carried the notes. It was so faint I thought it was my brain popping out random tunes based on how much euphoria I was feeling. But then I began to hear it over and over, the faint strumming of a banjo, fading in and out like the breath of a person. Slowly the strumming got loud enough that I sat up, being as still as I could, trying to listen. "What is it?" I heard Thomas say, but I shushed him and just told him to listen. The tune had changed. It was now continuous and I could now hear it, even though it was distant. The rhythmic strumming of the banjo was joined in by other instruments, a violin perhaps, some other kind of guitar. Deep in me something screamed for me to run, but it faded as the music slowly grew louder. The song was beautiful, and before we knew it, Thomas and I were both on our feet. That's when the vocals started. I couldn't hear what was being sung, but the pain and sadness of the voice perfectly folded into the flow of the instruments. "What the hell is that?" I heard Thomas asking me his question, but my body just refused to process anything except the music it was hearing. In front of us, just behind the first couple rows of trees, a large pillar of flame appeared. It certainly hadn't been there seconds ago, but suddenly it just was. It felt like I blinked, and suddenly I was 10 feet away from the tower of flame. I didn't remember moving, and honestly at the time, I couldn't remember anything. The now clear sound of bluegrass music swirled around me and through me. Like it was threads sewn into my flesh. Step after step, I walked closer to the blaze. Each step, the music would get louder and louder. No thought survived in my mind, as any that would arise would simply be swept away by the ethereal bluegrass tunes that filled the air around me. Just out of the corner of my eye, I could make out 4 figures dancing and rocking along with the rhythm of the song. A few steps in front of me, I noticed Thomas, moving swiftly towards the towering inferno. As he got inches away from it, he paused, before he took one big step and disappeared into the mass of golden and orange flames. Immediately the song was torn from my mind by the sound of Thomas's blood-curdling screams. I fell backwards as Thomas' screams grew more desperate, begging for someone to help him. I couldn't see inside the flames, but images of him slowly burning to death filled my mind. I watched as 4 figures calmly walked past me, stopping just before the wall of flame. Each was nearly 7 feet tall, but dressed in aged and charred white suits so dirty they looked like they had naturally come brown. I couldn't see their faces. As thick black voluminous black smoke obscured everything but a visible skeletal smile of bone and seared flesh. One by one, the figures stepped into the column of fire, the still swirling music fading as each figure disappeared. After the last one stepped into the flame, the column of flame just vanished without a trace. No smoke, no ash, no Thomas. I sat there for hours, crying and staring through the pitch black woods, until finally I was able to pick myself up and walk home. It was hard the next couple weeks, walking past all the missing posters with Thomas' face on them. Everyone helped Thomas's parents look for him, although everyone already knew it was far too late. I used to want to leave this small town and its nosy inhabitants. I wanted to travel to the city, meet some guy in a bar after my stressful 9 to 5 and fall in love, just to live happily ever after. But now, I don't know. Leaving feels like I'd be running. Like I'd be letting Thomas truly die. I recently started heavily studying the paranormal, reading books on demons and violent hauntings. I've tried researching if it's possible to harm paranormal entities. I want to one day see the Bluegrass Sirens again. And the next time I do, I want to learn if a ghost can scream. I first noticed it in the photo from Casey's birthday party. There was a group photo of us, all huddled together smiling for the camera. But between me and Jack, you could see a man sitting at the table behind us. He was hiding his face in his hands. Guess that guy doesn't like to be photographed, Jack laughed. Makes sense though. Who wants strangers having a picture of you, you know? Especially with all the weird facial recognition and stuff cameras do nowadays. It was still weird though. Looking at the picture sent chills down my spine. I mean, his face was turned directly towards the camera. If he really didn't want to be photographed, couldn't he just have tilted his head away? Or put it down, or put the menu in front of it? Why the creepy weeping angels pose? But some people are weird about being photographed. My brother never smiles for family photos, just to annoy my mom. One of my college friends has to have like 5 pounds of makeup on her face before she's willing to be in the photo. Maybe this guy always hid his face in his hands like that. He thought he was being funny or something. And so, I forgot about it. A few days later, though, I went to the grocery store after work. I passed a little girl in the bread aisle standing next to her mom. As I passed, I looked down and gave her a little wave, and stopped dead. She was hiding her face in her hands. Just like the guy in the photograph. Relax, she's probably just crying about something, I told myself as I hurried away. But then why was her face turning in time with mine? As though she were watching me between the cracks in her fingers. I threw my groceries on the conveyor belt. The cashier raised her eyebrow as the carton of eggs fell with a loud rattling sound. I'm in a hurry, I breathed as I ran over to the keypad and stuck my card in. It had started to rain. Light, powdering raindrops fell on the windshield, bleeding into little rivers that distorted the road before me. Swish, I turned on the wipers and they swept through. I couldn't stop my fingers from frenetically tapping on the wheel. You have to calm down. Don't let this be like last time. I rushed into the house, the rain and downpour now. By the time I got inside, my shirt was damp, sticking to my skin. Jenny, you're back, Earl. I raced up the stairs and ran into the bathroom. My hand shook as I grabbed a pill bottle out of the medicine cabinet. The pills rattled loudly inside, like a warning sign, and the letters printed across had read expired, 4/21. But I just couldn't. Jenny, Jack called through the door. Are you okay? I'm fine, just have a bad headache. I spent the rest of the evening wrapped up in a blanket, watching some stupid Hallmark movie, as Jack listened to the podcast downstairs. And now, I don't know if it was time or the meds. I almost laughed at the incident earlier. I almost had a panic attack because some little girl was crying at the store. So stupid. God forbid someday I actually have real problems, real things to panic about. I fell into a peaceful, dreamless sleep. The next morning, I went to work as usual. It was a good sign. Last time I had a panic attack, I had to call in sick. I took the elevator up to the 5th floor, humming to myself. Sat down in my office and worked on emails for an hour over coffee. And then it happened. Taking a little break, I walked over to the window, looked down at all the people hurrying along the sidewalks down below. But one was standing still. A woman in a black dress looking straight up at me. But of course, she wasn't actually looking, because her hands were hiding in her face. In that same creepy peekaboo pose that other two had. The blood drained out of my face. What the hell? I backed away from the window, kept backing away until my leg collided with my desk. I yelped as I fell backwards, grabbing the edge of the desk just at the last second. Breathing hard, I collapsed into the chair. I left work early, claiming I felt sick and got into bed for the rest of the day. I kept telling myself I shouldn't freak out, and there were perfectly good reasons for what I'd seen. Coincidence, flash mob, weird conspiracy plot by my ex-boyfriend to scare me. The doorbell ringing snapped me out of my thoughts. Jack was still at work, so I went downstairs. My hand fell on the doorknob and I was about to open it. But something in me made me pause, a sort of itchy, tingling feeling like I was being watched. I lifted my face and brought my eyes to the peephole. No. There on the front porch stood an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rose, except her face was hidden in her hands, just like all the other people I'd seen. That creepy peekaboo pose, wrinkled spotted hands covering her face. I drew the deadbolt and ran upstairs. I've been sitting up here for an hour now, waiting for Jack to come home. But part of me is terrified. What if, when he comes home, when he comes inside, he's hiding his face too? What then?